Can I tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out? A content strategy that burns you out is not a strategy. It's a content emergency that repeats every single week. Sunday nights, I'm scrambling, batch days that felt like sprints with no finish line, no clarity, and feeling burnt out, to posting things that I didn't even believe in just so there is something going up. And I was calling that strategy. Consistency is about your audience knowing they can count on you. It is not about you destroying yourself to prove it. Volume without intention is just noise. The content people love most comes from the life you're actually living. I want to tell you about a season in business when I was producing the most content that I've ever produced and I was not enjoying it. I had a posting schedule, I had templates, I had a whole batch day system on paper, and it was chef's kiss to the average person looking in. It looked super organized. But what I hadn't accounted for was that I had built a content machine, and machines don't take seasons off. They don't get tired. They don't have weeks where the creative well is just dried up and you just need to go and refill and come back again, right? Before you can pour out on all the things. I did not build in any of that reset time or that refilling time. So what happened was that I was showing up to my batch day running on empty. I was trying to force content out of sheer discipline and in the name of consistency to produce stuff that was fine but not me, and then felt guilty that it wasn't better or it wasn't performing. And then I'll do it all over again the next week and the next week and the next week. I have found that this is not sustainable and that is not the strategy. One of the things that I've learned really early on last year is that hustle culture is wearing a content calendar as a costume. The turning point for me came when I stopped asking, what do I need to post? And I start asking this. What do I actually have to give right now? And listen, that question has really been changing the way I show up and provide value to my different communities, whether it was on the YouTube channel, whether it was on the podcast, or even my email news list. And so when it comes to giving content advice, I'm very, very careful when it comes to doing that because everybody has a different take and a different perspective on content strategy. So today I'm going to share what works for me and what I have learned in the past year that has not only shown me results from a financial perspective or from my communities growing, but also it has allowed me to do what I love without feeling burnt out or feeling dried up. And I was able to produce my best content and knowing when to step away to just refill was very important for me. And I know that there is a definition when it comes to consistency. Consistency means posting on a schedule no matter what is going on in life and business. And now I am not saying that consistency doesn't matter. It absolutely does, because showing up regularly for your audience is real and it matters. But there's a distinction when it comes to different types of consistency, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. Consistency is about your audience knowing they can count on you. It is not about you destroying yourself to prove it. There is a version of consistency that is generative, where it's comes from a full place, it builds trust, it feels like a gift you're giving. And then there's a version of consistency that is also performative. It comes from obligation, it comes from volume without depth. And it also slowly drains the very creativity you're supposed to be sharing. Now, the first kind of consistency builds an audience that trusts you. And then the second one builds an audience and then burns out the person they came to trust. What I have found that a brand that chases or a creator that chases every trend, every platform, every format, and having that scattered energy that produces scattered results, the same is true for a creator who posts for the sake of posting. Volume without intention is just noise. You can be posting 3 times a day and you can be contributing to the noise. And the noise doesn't build a community, it just fills the space. That is something I had to sit with because I had to understand that my audience would rather wait a day or two for something real, something that is of substance that they can use, rather than receiving just a hollow set of content on schedule that does not provide any depth and doesn't help them along in their journey. So in the last year or so, I came up with 3 principles when it comes to my content strategy. And this is not about a posting schedule, it's not a template system, but these are principles that have been sustainable for me with regards to my content and how I approach content. And I think it's something that goes deeper than a calendar or goes deeper about the next video that I'm going to publish. And so the first principle is that content comes from a full cup and not a forced schedule. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot pour when you're tired. You cannot pour when you're drained. You cannot pour when you burned out. And nobody wants what comes from something empty. Let us be honest here. Before you touch your content calendar, audit your creative input. What have you been learning, reading, experiencing, sitting with? What conversations have shifted something in you recently? What question keeps coming up in your community that you actually have something to say about it? That is going to be your content, not the trending audio, not what someone else in your niche posted last week. What's actually alive in you right now? Now, I am not saying this means you abandon structure. Structure is essential. We've spent the last few weeks talking about structure and having things in place. And we talked about it a lot inside of the System Reset series. But the structure should serve what's inside of the cup, not try to manufacture what isn't there. Because if you start manufacturing what isn't there, better believe it, your audience can feel it and they can see it through your content. I have been in that place so many times. So, your action before planning your next content next week or this week is to take about 10 minutes and write down 3 things you are most genuinely thinking about in your business, in your creative life right now. That list is your starting point. It's not going to be a trend report. All right. So the second principle is one core idea, but multiple different expressions. And I have been learning this in the past few weeks and I'm trying to refine this principle. I am trying my best not to create new ideas every single week. I know it's hard for us as creators and visionaries. So I want to start going deeper on just a few things. So here's something that changed my content life last year. I stopped trying to have a new idea for every piece of content and started asking how many ways could I explore this one idea across 1 week or several weeks? Is it one podcast episode that produces a newsletter article that I can go a little more deeper and give a little more shift and perspective to my newsletter community in Substack? Is it that I can share 2 or 3 threads about what we've discussed on the podcast episode? Everything is coming from that one core idea? Can I create a reel or a short from the podcast episode talking about whatever that topic is? And so I'm creatively expressing the same idea, but in different ways, in different contexts, and also with a different depth of attention. Now, I don't want you to think this is laziness and it's contrary to what you have learned, but this is also going to help you, and it's also intentional. And it's the difference between the creator who is always scrambling for the next thing and the one who is actually building a body of work where you're going deeper and not just wider. So I want you to think about your next topic. Map it out. What's that core idea? What's the version of it that lives in a 30-second clip? What's that version look like in a 500-word newsletter? What does it look like in a 30-second reel or a 2 or 3 threads? What's the question you could ask your community that turns it into a conversation? One idea, multiple expressions. That's a week or even a month's worth of content, depending on how you create, without ever having to start from scratch. And this has been so helpful to me because little that a lot of people know, and I can share this secret. When I do these podcast episodes and the week in which it's going to be released, I don't want to think what I'm going to write for my newsletter. I do share this podcast turns into thread topics or conversations that I want to share in Substack notes. And it also fuels the newsletter. And so I can go a little more deeper and I can share different perspectives based on conversations from the podcast. So I am finding that one core idea gives me multiple different expressions. I also even go into my Instagram stories and I'm sharing more on things that I'm talking about in the podcast episode as well. One idea, multiple expressions. The other principle is that you need to protect the margins that feed the work. The content people love most comes from the life you're actually living. And that life needs space to breathe. Okay? It needs space to breathe. This is the principle most content strategy advice completely ignores. Your best ideas don't come at your desk. Your best ideas don't come in the most curated way. They come when you're on your walk, when you're in prayer, when you're in conversation, when you're in your quiet moments, before you even reach for your phone. The ideas are there. If your schedule is so full that there is no margins for you to, or no time to think, the creative well will dry up, and then you're back to forcing content out of discipline instead of creating it from overflow. Now, I'm not saying you need a 3-day creative retreat every quarter, which might be helpful. Okay, which might be helpful. But I'm saying you need intentional white space in your week. That unscheduled time that isn't for rest or admin, it's for just thinking, the wondering, the processing that eventually becomes your most resonant content. And so look at your schedule this week and identify where you have that margin of time, where there is no task, no recovery time, and it's just a time set aside for thinking and letting your imagination, as they say, flow. If you don't have any, that's going to be a problem because that is where you need to start. I want to close today with something I have been sitting with for a while. It was quite interesting because it came up in one of my devotional time when I was reading Rest, Remain, Release. In John chapter 15, Jesus talked about fruitfulness and about what it means to really produce something that lasts. And he said this, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, and apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And that verse stood out to me, especially when I was doing the devotional and I was really thinking back on it. And I think about it a lot in the context of content creation because the hustle culture version of content strategy is essentially post more, work consistently, no matter the cost, the fruit will come. But that verse says something totally different, and it says that the fruit comes from remaining. A lot, and hustle culture is against remaining, from being connected to God, from being connected to the source that gives you ideas, that replenishes you, that feeds you. And if you're creating from burnout, if you're generating content from a place of fear or obligation or performance, you've disconnected from the source. You might produce volume, yes, but it won't have life in it. And so every time I'm approaching content, I'm always looking at a way that the content that changes people, the episode that someone shares with a friend, the post where someone screenshots or saves, the thing that makes someone feel truly seen, that content comes from overflow, from a creator who is themselves rooted and nourished and also present. Protect that at all costs. And I have been ruthless in protecting that aspect, remaining connected to God, spending time in prayer, spending time in just remaining and just sitting still and not having to stick to a schedule and not having to post every single day. It is counterintuitive to what they have been saying when it comes to content strategy. But that's not indulgence, that's stewardship of your calling. And if your calling is rooted in you creating content, if it's rooted in hustle, you will be burned out. You will be pouring from an empty place. And best believe it, it is going to be reflected in your content. Now, is your content strategy currently drawing from overflow or is it drawing from empty? And what's one thing you could do this week to fill your cup before you pour? Before I sat down to create this podcast episode, I needed 3 days to remain. I wasn't well. And I was like, I gotta get this content recorded. I gotta do this. I gotta batch. I'm preparing to move. There's so much that needs to get done. But I just had to remain and just sit still. Not because I was sick, but because I needed that rest. My body was telling me that I needed rest. And I wasn't listening to it, to be honest, but I just needed the rest because I know what the next few weeks hold and I cannot give in the next few weeks if I'm on empty. So having the discernment and the wisdom to know when to just remain and sit is going to be so helpful and it's going to be a part of your content strategy. All right, so this brings us to the end of today's episode, and it's more of a reflective episode. Not for you to feel any type of way, but I want you to change how you approach your content. And this is a process that is always going to be ongoing. I'm even in that process of learning it. And because I'm shifting a little in terms of I'm ready to activate more or less the lifestyle portion of my content. And so I was feeling that way and that pull of just having to post something every single day. And I had to sit and I was like, yeah, I need to create content that I'm genuinely passionate about, that I know that is going to be helpful to other people. Why am I sharing it? And that's the question I ask myself with any piece of content that I produce. Why am I sharing this? If I was in my audience shoes, is it going to help me? If it's not going to help me, I'm not going to produce it. So this week, I want you to kind of like, If you need time to just remain and don't feel the pressure to produce. Again, producing from an empty cup serves no one. It doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve your audience. I'm Alicia, and this is how we create a flow.